Hey everybody, welcome to our first Crazy Gibberish on YouTube, and this, of course, is Thirsty Thursday, not Wastrel Wednesday, because I apparently don't know how to read. But one thing I can tell you today, folks, is I feel stupid and contagious. And I have my glamorous co host, Kyle Schuant, broadcasting from the Antipodean regions. And can I just say, I don't have a chair as nice as yours. I didn't realize our show was budgeted for that. So I'm going to have some words with people.
It's
See, I can't even speak.
tax deductible, man. Tax deductible.
I know. Well, I have an okay IKEA chair. It's a Kooplink or a Grundig or something like that, but it's on the other side of my office, and it's bulky, and it would be like a bull in a china shop trying to get it around.
Oh,
But
this one is actually inherited from my wife. So
uh,
when she started working from home a lot because of all the lockdowns and things, there
right.
was birthday was coming up, and she's always got a horrifically bad back. So I got her like a one of those office chairs that's got the massage junk built in,
Nice.
and so I inherited this from her.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Uh, oh my God, the chat's just been sitting here rolling. All right. Well, hang on another minute, guys. If anyone's out there still, and I'll be right back. I've got to.
Is it is it still being displaying the whole time?
I apparently. So, uh, like I said, I'll be back in just a couple more minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Boy, you guys think the Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, his live streams get fucked up sometimes, and he boomers it. He's got nothing on me. 45 minutes of awkward silence. Jesus.
I'm getting flashbacks to Jenny Cam.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Kyle. Are you... first of all, an apology to everyone. I thought when the internet connection dropped that, like Facebook will, YouTube would just go, hey, I haven't heard from you guys. I'm just going to shut this off. But no, it'll just sit there and happily plow on through without any consideration of whether or not anybody is on the other end. So I know we usually do these things.
You might want to, I can't see the times on it. You might want to just put a note in the chat of when the actual talking starts.
Yeah, that
78 or whatever it is.
That's why I've got you as a co-host, Kyle, to remind me of these things, amongst others.
Right, because otherwise people might watch 10 minutes of your wall and...
Yeah. I'm not even sure. I think, okay, so I'll just say... so there. Anyway. So how are you fixed for time, Kyle? Has this kind of shot?
I'm all right.
Okay. Anyway. I'm sorry. I'm back live and I couldn't think of anything to say. It's just...
You were admiring my chair.
I was admiring your chair, yeah, because that...
My chair is actually a hand-me-down from my wife.
Yes, that's right. Hand-me-down.
As well as one car I had and numerous phones I've had. That she upgrades and then I get hers.
Yeah. I have gone the other way around with PC stuff over the years. It's like, like... oh, well, I'm done with this Pentium 200. I'm upgrading to a Celeron 300. You want this PC, babe? Sure. Obviously dating myself with a timestamp on it there. But, yeah, no, I had these little, it's event seating. And they're very thickly padded, and you might think, oh, it's not really uncomfortable. But apparently the... Hellraiser cube that makes up my lower back does not like being rotated and shifted in the direction that this chair does. And so rather than me going, I'm sitting in a nice padded chair for an hour, I'm like, okay, as long as I don't stream for more than like an hour and 20 minutes, I won't need to take barbiturates and lie on a hard floor.
After an hour then.
Yeah.
You've got to get yourself a fancy new chair.
Yeah.
Tax deductible. You can claim it off all the profits that you make from the live stream.
Well, when we break 1,000 subscribers and have all this all this traffic and income, people will be able to super chat us. I guess that's the thing. You send a super chat.
What's super chatting anyway?
Okay, so in the realm of live streaming, I was referencing Nick Rekieta earlier, and he is one of the big guys on YouTube when it comes to that sort of thing. And he's been big primarily because, he covered the Trump impeachment trial earlier this month and talks a lot about social and legal issues. Now, he's a nerd. He also talks about 40K and Dungeons and Dragons, which is where that Venn diagram overlap is. I didn't just find him when I did a YouTube search for, true Merc and Patriot live streamers or anything like that. So, yeah, he does focus a lot on nerdy things, but he'll have maybe 1,000 people in chat and 2,500 to 5,000 people watching, depending on his topic and how hot button an issue it is. And he like, as he is an attorney, he may have an answer to a question, and if you got chats just flying past at the speed of light, you can highlight them by donating a couple of bucks, and it can, you could donate like a dime, just whatever Google will let you enter in your local currency, and it will bump up on the on his control panel side. Hey, Kyle Schuant has sent a super chat.
This is another great example of how the internet has changed day-to-day life, because you can't really imagine walking past a lawyer's office and they're just like knocking on the door, poking your head in. I've just got one quick question.
Yeah, and so just hand him a $20 bill and say, "Can you say in Kermit the Frog's voice that this Trump impeachment is a farce?" Could you do that? An attorney would just look at you like, I didn't think Reagan was due to shut down the laughing academies for another couple of years, but now here we are 35, 40 years later, and yes, you can hit up an attorney on YouTube, give them $20, and say, "Can you say in Kermit the Frog's voice, the Trump's impeachment trial is a farce?" So, but that's what you do. You can super chat. Yeah,
come such a long way.
You can super chat. You can send chat messages to the YouTuber, but YouTube fixed things a few years ago. Whereas, like today, let's say we got 10 people in the live chat, and they wanted to super chat us, they couldn't. Back before, I think, like 2014. Anybody could donate to you in a live stream, if they were even doing live streams then. But the big thing is monetization. I think I've got like 400 subscriptions on my YouTube channel, maybe less, probably less. But I could still activate YouTube AdSense and get money. I still have a little trickle of ad money. Well, YouTube stepped in and said it was like this great demonetization. And there were people who had tens of thousands of subscribers and videos that had tens of thousands of views. But they said, well, that's not a lot of views, is it? That's not a lot of subscribers, is it? So they demonetized whole swaths of creators. And I mean, it's YouTube. What the F are you going to do about it, right? So, people who were getting a trickle in, just a little bit, pizza and beer money, enough to cover an overdue library book, or, buy a hamburger or something like that. Suddenly, we're just told to fuck off until they got more viewers. And YouTube finally generously settled on, if you've got 1,000 subscribers, you can turn on AdSense, and if you've got X number of people in a live chat, you can let them super chat you.
Well, it's probably not entirely a bad thing, because if you've only got 100 subscribers, you probably don't need to annoy them with ads. Whereas if you've got 1,000 subscribers, then you're obviously popular enough that people will put up with a few ads.
Sure. And I think
under however many subscribers, you're essentially a television community channel. So
yeah, I mean, you're
they don't usually have ads. Mind you, no, some have ads just for the local ones. Come down to Bob's hardware store. It's
yeah. I mean, and this is basically, at this point in our lives, like if we were trying to do this, I mean, first of all, we'd have to be in the same locale, but if we just decided, hey, people need to know about Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't think we're reaching enough people via our ham radios, we'd go rent a Betamax recorder and record a tape and take it to the local public broadcasting and say, hey, we'd like the Saturday night.
Well, that was Wayne's World, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the plot of Wayne's World. I mean, that was not a long time ago. And if anyone comes in the chat or comments on this later and said, that was 30 years ago, I will come to your house and shit on your front door step. I know the 90s were not a few years ago. I don't need to be reminded of it.
30 years isn't always 30 years. As I think I was discussing with you the other day, I read an interesting book, The Decadent Society, and it's basically saying things aren't changing as quickly as they used to. And they gave the example of the Back to the Future movies. So Marty McFly goes from 1985 to 1955, and it's a completely different world. Now, in the movies, he then goes to 2015, and it's also a completely different world. In reality, it's not so different. We've got the internet, we've got mobile phones, but mobile phones existed in 1985.
They did.
Well, everyone had phones. Everyone had TV screens that they looked at.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's become flatter.
Yeah.
There haven't been a lot of profound changes. There were a lot of social changes between 55 and 85 in the position of ethnic minorities and women and so on. And then from 85 to today, there's been some gay rights and stuff, but there haven't really been a lot of profound changes. You go from 85 to 55 or vice versa, and you have a bit of a culture shock. 85 to 2015 or today, not so much.
Yeah.
Not so much. You'd get along. So, in 1985, our parents saying, that was only 30 years ago, that's it, yeah. But now saying that was only 30 years ago, that's not so crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, take for example, the constant fallback for futuristic stuff is computers. I've often thought that, like, if you found yourself in a TV show, I don't know if you've ever heard of it or saw it down in Australia. It's called The Waltons, and it was this.
Yeah, I remember that show.
Yeah. Good night, John Boy. If you talk to the Walt, and what put me in this mindset is the show's timeline started somewhere in their 1930s. I don't remember exactly what the date was, but by the time the show officially ended, regularly weekly episodes, it was after the end of the Second World War. And as far as they're concerned, it's not much different than it was before the start of the war. But out on the bleeding edge of things, and for good or ill, driven by like military technology, like, now there's digital solid state computers. There's people working on this, on these cathode ray tube in-home projection devices called television, that sort of thing. But that never comes up on the Waltons. If you took John Boy Walton out of 1940 and walked him through even a podunk town today, he'd be shocked. It would shock him to his core. But you take, a reasonable person who's not going to fall over dead from surprise from, as you say, 30 years ago, and you're like, well, okay, this is a PC. This is what personal computers like. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That I can see the logical evolution.
Yeah, the desktop is now a laptop, but you don't literally put it in your lap because it fries your gonads.
Exactly.
So, in practice, it's on a desk. It's just that it's more easily cleared away if you want to have dinner or something.
Exactly. And I mean, even in the mid 1990s, like one of my favorite hobbies. Or I shouldn't call it a hobby, I should call it a time waster, is the magazine Info World. All of its issues going back to 1978 are available on Google Books to read. You can go back and look at it. And I love reading old computer ads and hardware reviews and that sort of thing. And you go back to, like, I think the first issue, the first issues rolled out in like 76 or 77, Apple II days, right? but just kind of hopping through the timeline, as it were. By the time you get to like 1995, you're like, okay, laptop, what they called a tablet PC back then, it was still that thick, you know, weighed as much as a hardback dictionary, but it was, you know, there was tablet computing and that sort of thing. So you see like the incremental jump ups, and again you go, okay, logically I can see, of course laptops are thinner, of course PCs are speed is no longer measured in the dozens of megahertz, but the thousands of megahertz. But again, you hit the nail on the head, and I think what it is there's like a Grand Canyon difference that stops somewhere in 1979. You know, there's this vast gulf between 1979 and 1989. But between 1990 and 2000, it's not very big at all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, things are... Time gets on by. Why was I... Oh, yeah, because anybody that reminds me that the 90s were 30 years ago, I'll poop on your front doorstep. I don't even remember why I was making that odious threat. There's your $5 word for the day, Kyle. Odious. Or $6.28 Australian.
Getting to be worth less and less.
Yikes.
Mind you, lots of us have got big savings at the moment because we haven't been allowed to go out and spend money.
Yeah, no kidding.
So our savings are building up.
Well, that's... That you know, on the one hand, I don't remember what movie theater popcorn tastes like, but on the other hand, you know.
Yeah, pretty much. So today we were going to speak about abstractions in AD&D.
That's right. We were going to talk about abstractions.
Yeah.
Yes, beyond any shadow of a doubt. Listen, I meant to grab my copy of Murphy's Rules to have at the table. I'm not getting out from behind the camera again. Everybody's sick of looking at the bare wall, even though I can see it. There is a note that in the game, and I can't remember if it's Rollmaster or Dragon Quest, but basically, based on how they handle their percentages on various things happening, in an average battle with 10,000 warriors, something like 800 of them will maim themselves in the first minute of battle.
There's a few games like that. Years ago when I played Rollmaster, we used to joke because they've got their critical hit tables and their critical failure tables, fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a missile fumble, and there's a bow fumble, and I can't remember them all. Anyway, and there are things like stumble over an imaginary unseen deceased turtle, lose 2 rounds.
Yeah.
But one of the silliest ones was if you're a bowman, you accidentally take off your own ear.
That is exactly the one I was thinking of. Yeah, you draw the bowstring back and just...
You accidentally take off your own ear, and it worked out something like 1 in 200 shots would take off your ear.
Yeah.
There was no word in the rules what would happen if you already had your ear taken off. If you roll that result again, would it have no effect? Or were you trying to fire Southpaw today?
Took off the other one, yeah.
So our joke became that, like, young bowmen, like, you could tell an old bowman because he was missing an ear. It's like, the MMA guys with the cauliflower ears.
Yeah.
Wow. And the bashed in nose. So that perhaps young bowmen, in order to look more experienced, would saw it off.
Yeah.
And some of the left smart ones would saw both of them off.
What was that old myth about Amazon women would burn off one of their breasts so they could use a bow? It's like, if your tits were getting in the way of the bow, you're using the bow wrong to begin with, ma'am.
I would have thought so, but Yeah, it was probably written by someone who wasn't a bowman. At me.
Yeah. But yeah, the point of all of this, folks, is that AD&D's abstractions are well and good. And I mean, even Gary points out there are times to set the abstraction aside. Um, you know, a 20th level fighter, the hypothetical 20th level fighter, who is, knocked unconscious with a drink with, ground up opium in it or something like that, and then hauled off to the evil temple, strapped to the sacrificial altar. When the high priest plunges the dagger into his chest, he doesn't go, "Damn, that was only 1 point of damage." Okay, that was 4, but you've got, you know,
The high priest sacrifice becomes
yeah, and you're just lying there going, by my math, this is going to take you like 75 minutes if you had someplace else to be.
Yeah, well, that's it. See, so many games make what I believe is a mistake in thinking that more detail must be more realistic. The useful distinction I learned in high school physics was the difference between precision and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Accuracy is whether or not your measurement is right, more or less, to whatever degree, and precision is the number of decimal points that you've got.
Right.
So if we say that I am 170.2161715 centimeters tall, that's precise, but it's not accurate.
Right.
If we say that I am about 6 foot, that is accurate, but it's not precise. And when we get into more precision, we see it would be more accurate to say I'm 5'10", but about 6 foot. So, and people often think that if there's precision, it must be accurate. This is a trick that journalists and more dodgy kind of scientists and that out there use all the time. If they put a whole bunch of decimal points, oh well, must be accurate. If he says that there's going to be the unemployment rate is going to be 10.213% next September, well, he must be telling the truth. If he'd said it'll be above 10%, people will be less believing of him. Because he said it's 10.213%, oh well, his computer model must be really great then. So that's the difference between precision and accuracy.
Yes.
Many games aim for precision, like with critical failure charts, but as a result, they don't get accuracy. So I think a system which is less precise, like armor class, hit points, and that sort of stuff, actually ends up being more accurate. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, Bill. You'll have heard stories from Paul Stromberg and stuff, so you'll know the full story. But my understanding is the whole armor class and hit points thing started with Dave Arneson sitting down at the game table, and the combat resolution was just you each roll a 1d6 and whoever gets highest wins and the other guy dies. And people were a bit unsatisfied with just dying in one dice roll. So he went, oh, okay, and then pulled down his ironclad rules from the wall, which was all about Civil War era battleships basically pounding each other into smithereens by their weight of shot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we got armor class and hit points from. That's my understanding.
Now, I know that the terminology came from that game.
Yeah.
But it would certainly follow that they borrowed more than that from it. But the idea of grade 1 or first class armor being better than grade 5 or 5th class armor, definitely that comes from there. And again, it would follow that if your armor is grade 1 or first class, that your squishy bits are going to be a lot better protected than if you're, grade 8th or 8th class armor.
Well, my point's a more broad one about game design and how it comes about. Because if, for example, we say that your weapons do 1 to 6 hit points of damage and everyone has 1 to 6 hit points, then mathematically it is exactly identical to just roll to hit if you hit, and he doesn't stop you. 1d6 versus 1d6. The winner wins and the loser dies. If instead you have a 2-hit roll and you each have 1d6 hit points and can inflict 1d6 damage, mathematically it's the same result in the end. But it doesn't feel the same, because you might take 1 hit point of damage and decide to run away. You have a bit of back and forth. It doesn't just take one combat round to resolve things. You have a bit of back and forth on it. A lot of the times it will just be one combat round. You do 6 points of damage and he's got 1. Okay. But it doesn't feel quite the same. It takes a few rounds to resolve, and it's a bit more, cinematic and dramatic because you have that back and forth. And then it becomes more cinematic and dramatic if you have, 20 hit points and you each do 1 to 6 hit points of damage. Then there's a lot more back and forth.
And what? Go ahead.
Yep. So.
No, I was just going to say, and one of the things too, just regarding the matter of abstraction too, is that the 1 minute combat round in AD&D, and this is, I'm probably getting dangerously close to actually quoting the rule, is that the 1 minute combat round is not a single overhanded chop or a mighty thrust and then stop and wait 59 seconds to see what happens next. A 1 minute combat round where you inflict 8 points of damage constitutes feints, thrusts, parries, dodges, maybe an escape attempt to get out. Maybe one of your points was not, it's like, oh, I've got a long sword. Well, maybe one of your points is, you locked swords with your enemy, and you're both pushing him down this way, and you smash the guy with an armored gauntlet. There's a lot that goes on in that 60 seconds.
The 1 minute combat round makes a bit more sense when I say how I think of armor class and hit points. Okay, so the thing with armor class, so in AD&D, for those who don't know, those rare few, makes you harder to hit. Okay, the 2-hit roll goes up as the armor class goes. Now, some people argue, well, armor doesn't make you harder to hit, it just makes it harder for the weapon to penetrate. But mathematically, that comes to the same thing. So if we just have 2 states of the person being unarmored, just in normal clothes, and then armor, some sort of armor, generic armor. If armor halves your chance of getting hit, but then when you are hit, you take full damage, versus armor doesn't change your chance of getting hit, but when you do hit, you take half damage. Mathematically, that's the same. The result at the end is half damage. But if you have armor subtract from damage, then you have to do some maths when they roll for damage.
Right.
Some game systems do that, and that's fine, but it leads to more maths. And more maths, even simple addition and subtraction, tends to slow the flow of play.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You get that situation where it takes so long to resolve the combat round that by the time it ends, you no longer care who won or lost. You're just like,
no, I feel
get it over and done.
I'll tell you something.
And if players avoid combat, I want them to avoid combat because they're scared of dying, not because they're scared of boredom.
What the only time I have ever seen simplicity work against the playability of a game, and I shouldn't say that. There are times when you can oversimplify stuff, and people are just like, "This is," But big stompy robot games were a huge thing in the 90s on tabletop. And the big kid on the block was BattleTech, by virtue of having been first and having copied the art designs of the then pretty popular Macross/Robotech. In that game, when you shoot somebody with a weapon, when you shoot another robot with a weapon, and you hit, your opponent scratches off a number of armor boxes on his on his sheet, which that doesn't sound necessarily that bad. But for example, if you fire a swarm of missiles, if you fire a swarm of 20 missiles, and you hit with 12 of them, well, the missiles are broken into groups of 5. Like, how many missiles hit? Okay, so I did 12, so that's 2 5s, and then you've got a leftover 2 to allocate. So let's see which hit, and then it's like, okay, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4. Okay, let me put the 2 over here. Wait, did I do the 5th one over here already? Because I've already got some damage. I don't know, and it goes like that.
That's not quite, compared to the mental scene of like these missiles zooming in and boom 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 hitting and chunks of armor blowing off.
Yeah. Well,
it's not quite as exciting.
that was a fairly simple system. In the mid '90s, which was not 30 years ago, a game came out from a company called DreamPod 9 called Heavy Gear, and it was ostensibly more complex, yet it plays faster. It plays faster and it plays easier, and it represents that swarm of anime missiles with the smoke trails peppering the target, or the big gun blasting a hole through the guy. It's one of those things that you'd have to see in action, but it is on the face more complex, but it is mechanically easier, and it does not cram 90 minutes of fun into 4 hours, which is what BattleTech tends to do.
Yeah, so that's my argument for armor class, basically. As I said, armor class can make it harder for you to be hit, but then when you are hit, you take full damage. Or it doesn't change how hard you are to hit, but it reduces the damage that is done to you. Mathematically, those two are the same. They lead to the same end result, the same amount of average damage. You can combine them. GURPS 3rd edition combined them. But that led to odd things like I'd roll to hit, and then I'd hit you, and then I'd roll for hit location. And then because you had different armor on different body parts, we'd find, no, actually, I didn't hit you. So if you had a guy who's wearing gauntlets and nothing else, he's going like Spartan movie style. So you roll to hit. Oh, yes, that's a hit. Great. But because the gauntlets are passive defense and make it harder for you to hit him, then you roll for hit location. Oh, I hit him on the arm. Okay, great. No, actually, you missed by 1. So, I vividly remember once this player, Tom, who on discovering that, he had the little guy with a rapier kind of thing, and on discovering that, he got so angry, he stormed out. He stormed out of the game place, and then a couple of minutes later, he came back in because it was his house. So he storm out, go to his car, slam the door, the engine start, and then there was this pause, and the engine stopped, and he came back in.
Oh my God, that's
what that kind of thing does to people. So I don't think it's a good idea to combine making it harder to hit and making reducing damage, because it leads to those sorts of odd situations. I think it should be either or, and I prefer the ones where it makes it harder to hit, and then once you hit, you take full damage. They found that chink in the armor or whatever.
Yeah.
Mathematically, it works out the same. It's not as intuitively obvious, but it does actually work out the same mathematically. And yeah, now as for hit points, people for years have banged on about hit points and how they escalate over the levels, and it can lead to some absurd things like a guy jumping off a 200-foot cliff and he's all right. Now, when you get up to like 20th level or something, it starts getting absurd. I agree. I think the sweet spot for AD&D is in those lower levels, and then once you're playing a different game, I think that was a good emphasis. 9th level, build a stronghold and clear the surrounding hexes of monsters and all that. You're now playing a different game. You're Gandalf the Grey, who's gone, fought the Balrog, and come out as Gandalf the White. you're a more epic guy now. It's a different kind of game. I
You
don't think that's often appreciated.
you soloed the
But
Type
anyway,
6 demon and took all the XP for yourself.
yeah, exactly. But I think in those levels below that, below ninth level, or whatever it is for each class, um, hit points are easily understood. Like people say, "Where's the parry rules?" Well, there are parry rules in AD&D, but nobody uses
My
them.
players use them. What's wrong with you?
I think it's easier to understand your hit points are in part parry. Classic Traveler had an interesting thing, which again nobody used, but it was still an interesting thing that when you do melee, so you have your stat endurance like Constitution, and when you've had that many melee attacks, so your Constitution of 7, endurance of 7, 7 melee attacks. After that, you're then at a negative. You're fatigued. You're this guy staggering around in the 12th round of the boxing match kind of thing. You're just fatigued. And again, people tended not to use it. For one thing, the combats don't usually last long enough for it to matter unless the person's got 2 endurance. So, but it is an idea that we could transfer over to AD&D with its hit points. You're doing all these frantic parries, it tires you out.
Yes.
And this is one reason that fighters get more hit points than magic users, as they go up. They're just better at that sort of thing. Now, as for... then you look at the non-magical healing, and you get the odd result that if you get a 30 hit point guy and a 10 hit point guy, and they've both been reduced to 1 hit point or 0 hit points, it takes the 30 hit point guy longer to recover. I don't mind that too much. He's working at a higher level of performance. So in my work as a trainer, I've occasionally taken people to powerlifting competitions. Someone in their first 3 months of training, they could just go and max out one day, and then they can come back and do their next session just as normal. They don't have to interrupt their training at all. They don't have to do special training for it. They just, one day I'll max out. I'll use today's session to max out and see what I can do. Someone who's got a couple of years behind them, and they're squatting 500 pounds or something, that person needs to spend a few months building up to it. Then they have a week off and rest beforehand, and then they have a kind of a rebound where they perform really well on the day. And everyone I've trained has always said, "Oh yeah, I'll come back and I'll be back here to train on Sunday or Tuesday or whatever." And no, you won't. You'll take a week off. And then a couple of days later, they're like, they just crash. They're exhausted. They're sore. They're tired all the time. Yeah, because working up to that peak took a lot out of them. You know, when Usain Bolt ran 100 meters in 9.59 seconds or whatever, he wasn't able to do it again tomorrow. That's something you have to build up to over a lot of time.
Yeah.
And that working at your maximum possible performance takes a lot out of you. Now, obviously, I've never been a swordsman or anything like that, but you could see the same sort of thing. If you've got someone who's top level fighter, really the top of their game, that person isn't doing that every day. No. And the higher the performance, the more they're going to have to recover afterwards. You know, you see, even like Mike Tyson, he wasn't doing a fight every week. He wasn't even doing a fight every month. It was like 1 or 2 a year.
Sure.
You know, it's
sure.
You know, so whereas the amateur guys, they can go and do a match every month, no worries, with their
right
helmets on and all the rest. Yeah. So a high level performance takes longer to recover from. So I don't have a problem with like the 30 hit point guy taking longer to heal up than the 10 hit point guy. And the use of magic obscures that point.
Yeah.
So I think the hit points actually work pretty well as an abstraction.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and you know, if people who say, "Oh, I want Legolas," and you know, you don't see Aragorn or Conan or doing that, those movies would be boring. To those people who want to see what realistic medieval combat looks like, and it's not even medieval; it's more Napoleonic era combat. Check out a film called The Duelists with Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine in it, and it plays a couple, or it portrays a couple of French noblemen who basically, Keitel's got a grudge against Carradine's character, and like he begs for transfers from units to like hop unit to unit to get to this guy to duel him to eventually, you know, restore his own honor. And there is a scene, it's like the it's a third duel. They fight in a stables, and they fight on foot with cavalry sabers, and the scene starts in medias res. They are covered with sweat, they are barely able to lift their arms. They're more body blocking each other than they are swinging swords at each other. And you know, when they pick up their swords, Kyle, you'd think it was like a first day person trying to pick up that 45-pound disc to put it on. I mean, these guys are friggin' exhausted after a few rounds of combat, and they're
not dripping with blood.
No, they're not covered with blood. You know, they haven't taken massive hacks and wounds. It's just it is a great scene for really it covers the gamut of what we're talking about, because on the one hand it represents a good AD&D round. You're tired, you're bashing on each other, the AD&D combat round is not stab 8 points, I wait to see if you can do the same to me, and in 60 seconds we'll do that again. And then on the other hand, it well represents the AD&D combat round as fun, because you've got to ask yourself, do you want Herc the fighter to plow through a room of kobolds in an epic, heroic charge, swinging his two-handed sword, or do you want Herc the fighter to cut down a couple of kobolds and then have to have his second bring a stool over so he can sit down and catch his breath for a few minutes? Because AD&D will give you the former. Realism gives you the latter. The former is a hell of a lot more fun than the latter.
I think it's more realistic than many people give it credit for. It's just that people tend to think, oh yeah, but what about the 20th level guy or whatever? But it just, like, there was a discussion on Dragonsfoot the other day. Like,
I'm sorry.
The 20th level magic user would take 3 days to memorize all these spells.
Mm-hmm.
And it went on for pages and pages, and I asked the question, please tell me about this campaign where you had a first level magic user who worked his way up to 20th. And nobody even quoted me to mock me, you know. Let alone
I'll mock you, Kyle. If it'll make you feel, I'll mock you.
It's just a completely abstract question, you know, when you're talking about, but what about these high level guys? Well, but if you start at first level, you're going to have vanishingly few reach that level, and you can deal with that problem then. But the vast majority of play is going to be low level, like first to fifth level. That's going to be the vast majority of play.
Yeah.
And lots will perish on the way with any kind of honest GM. So I think hit points work as an abstraction, because as well as understood as like the physical toughness, which is why you get a constitution bonus,
mm-hmm.
An ability to take wounds, it's also parrying and fatigue. There aren't really that much in the way of fatigue rules in the basic game. Sorry, in the basic 3 books. I mean,
sure.
There's not really fatigue rules there. But should you get tired if you go through a long combat? Yeah, that makes sense. It is very fatiguing. If anyone's ever been in any kind of fight, doesn't have to be a firefight, just a fist fight, any kind of confrontation with a mugger, or being present at a car accident or something, you will have experienced your heart rate just skyrocketing, even when you're not doing anything. Heart rate skyrocketing, sweat coming out on your face, tunnel vision, going deaf, going numb, and kind of variations in your perception of distance. You know, you think someone distant is actually close, or vice versa. Time slowing down and all that. That's a very fatiguing thing to be in a situation, in that life or death situation, a threat to life or limb, even if it's somebody else's that you're just watching.
Right.
That whole adrenaline thing, and part of the skill of fighters, just like the skill of good police officers or boxers and people like that, or paramedics, is being able to handle that adrenaline. It's still going to happen, but they can handle it. They know what their physiological response will be, and they respond to that. So I'm sure, just as it was for me in the army with experienced soldiers, I'm sure it would have been true back in the days of pikes and spears and all that.
Mm-hmm.
The experienced soldier sits them down during some other lesson tells them, you know, this is what's going to happen. You know, you're going to go deaf. You're going to get tunnel vision.
Right.
So you have to, you know, and they teach you the tactical breathing and all the rest. I'm sure those were parts of lessons, you know, in the 10th century or whatever, but nobody bothered writing them down because everybody knew. So that's part of the escalating hit points as well, because as the fighter, or any character, but especially the fighter, gets more experience, they get better endurance, they get better at parrying, they get better at handling the physiological and psychological stress of combat. So people will say D&D is just an abstraction or whatever, but as I said, there's that difference between accuracy and precision. D&D is not precise. It doesn't give you hit locations, with the exception of that if you're not wearing a helmet. But anyway, we won't talk about that. It doesn't give you hit locations.
And also shield sizes.
Yeah, it doesn't give you bleeding versus broken bones and all the rest. It's not precise. I think it is accurate. Maybe at like 12th level or whatever, it's not anymore. But I think definitely in the lower levels, 1st to 5th, I think it's accurate, even if it's not precise. And you know, you mentioned the duelists. There's a little YouTube video called Night of Hope.
Yes,
and that's made by some
very good.
Made by some guys who they do, you know, modern Western martial arts,
mm-hmm.
or modern reproduction of them, and they do scenes for movies and stuff. Anyway, they've just got a little video, and there's a woman being ravished by bandits and stuff, and she escapes into the woods, and they chase her, and then and she clutches a little amulet, and this Knight of Hope appears. This guy in plate mail appears, and she's obviously got that amulet of summoning a 5th level fighter.
Right.
You know, and he goes through, and it's really interesting to watch. Like he knocks off like a dozen guys or something.
Yeah.
You could sort of watch it and look at the 1-minute blocks fighting. And he actually does what a 5th level fighter, for example, could do against a bunch of 0 level bandits. He does that. So he does multiple attacks while they're doing one each. He can dispatch 3 guys in one round, and then, you know, miss another guy. And then at some point they injure him and he drops to his knees for a bit, and then he gets back up, and so on. But if you look at that in 1-minute blocks, you could easily have a scene like that in D&D with a 3rd to 5th level fighter dealing with a bunch of 0 level bandits. And people go, oh, they come at him one at a time, and they don't always. But there's 2 things. One is they're 0 level guys, so they don't have any kind of leader with them to coordinate them. Say, you know, surround him. You go over there. You hold him back while we attack him. Whatever. Nobody's coordinating. They're all acting as individuals. Mm-hmm. That's part of what makes them 0 level guys. And you also see they can't all go at him, because when they're swinging their blades, they'd actually end up stabbing each other.
Right.
So there's just not enough room. You know, it takes a lot of room for someone to swing a sword. Mm-hmm. Plus, even if you've got 3 guys around him and they coordinate, someone has to go in first. Do you want to be the first guy to go at that guy in plate mail with a bloody great sword? Any volunteers?
Yeah, it's what is the I mean, to say the great scene in Chernobyl is to define the entire miniseries, but when the Bureau of Mine Department shows up at the Tula mine to get all the miners to dig cooling trenches under Chernobyl. The basically the shift foreman just stands there and stares dead-eyed at this Russian apparatchik, and he's got a couple of dudes with rifles, and the foreman asks, where are we going? And the guy says, you don't need to know this. And he just stares at him for a second, and the other miners are just like, they're not giving ground. And one of the guards kind of makes a move with his gun, and great piece of dialogue out of the foreman. He says, "Get on with it, then. You won't get us all." Basically, like, you got 30 rounds down the banana, and then the other 200 miners get to you.
Yeah, someone has to be bold enough to go first, though.
That's very true. That's also very true.
And that's why D&D has reaction rolls and morale checks.
Yes. And fortunately, in that case, the apparatchik had a high enough charisma to make both sides, his bodyguards and the miners, stop.
Well, that's it. So I think, yeah, when you look at these sorts of scenes and you look at the D&D, you've got to look at the rules as a whole and what you use. So, if you just have hit points and armor class and then hordes of 0 level guys, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you start thinking, well, how much tactics are you going to have if you're a 0 level guy and there's no leader? Are you really going to coordinate that well? There's a reason that in the real world we have leaders. We have the corporal, or the sergeant, or the manager, or whatever. Someone to or the head surgeon. Doesn't matter. You've got someone to coordinate all these people and make them work most efficiently. And if there's no leader, that changes things. And it makes it a lot easier for that bold guy in plate mail or whatever to come in. And so then you start thinking about leadership and why is charisma help with morale checks? Charisma helps, in reaction roles. Do they actually want to fight you, or are they scared off, or would they rather be friends with you? Charisma helps in reaction roles on the enemy side as well. Is there somebody who leads, who takes charge and coordinates these guys so that they're willing and able to fight? And then you look at things like armor class and hit points and that, and it makes sense. So I think it's more realistic than most people give it credit for. Of course, once you start bringing in magic missiles and that, all that goes out the window. But just looking at the combat system, I believe it is accurate, but it's not precise in terms of realism.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. Now, accuracy versus precision. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about Conflict, capital C, Twilight 2000, Traveler from the same company, and so on. So when it comes to gun porn games, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, just to kind of embrace that genre of role-playing games, whether it's post-apocalypse or modern military or whatever. I mean, briefly, and I'll say briefly, because God knows we could be here till 10 o'clock Eastern U.S. Just discussing that genre. But as somebody yourself who has been there and done that, in the overall, we're not gonna name names or pick out anything in particular, because again, we could be here all day and all night. Would you be of the mind to say that they get it mostly right, mostly wrong, or just kind of fall somewhere in a broad mean?
Well, you sort of have to name names, because
Oh, fair enough.
So I think things like I think when you go think like Rollmaster, they did Space Master and stuff, and they had firearms and that, and I think they got it completely wrong, because I think a lot of games focus on how can I put it? The physical mechanics of combat and wounding. Um, you know, you'll get games like Phoenix Command or GURPS or something like that, and they try to talk about bleeding and broken arms and so on and so forth. But what's often missing is just that kind of that fog of war. The fact that you do have tunnel vision. You know, like police will talk about this, that you know that they were confronting the suspect, the domestic violence call out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're confronting the suspect, and then the woman who called them for help actually comes up and stabs them.
Yeah.
Or I recently watched that movie from 2003 with Colin Farrell and Michelle Rodriguez and SWAT, and they showed it when they're doing the practice, and he goes past a doorway, and then someone appears from behind the doorway and shoots him in the side of the head kind of thing. It's like to be aware of your surroundings. But when the adrenaline's running, it's really hard to do that, and that's why real world teams drill and drill and drill and drill and drill and practice and slow themselves down. So in real world combat in Afghanistan, I understand, and Iraq, I understand the US military and the Australian military has done the same thing. They actually slowed down with their room clearing drills, because when they slowed down, they found they're less likely to accidentally get civilian casualties.
Mm-hmm.
Take a bit longer to identify the target. It's like, because you actually have a couple of seconds to identify the target. Everyone imagines like this dramatic thing. People burst into the room and the guy's sitting there waiting with his rifle pointed at the doorway, and he just opens up.
Mm-hmm.
That does happen, but not as often as you think, because that guy is just overwhelmed by having half a dozen guys burst into the room. It's like, oh shit.
Sure.
And you can't help it. You know, I've done urban warfare training where I sit there as the enemy in the room, and I can hear them stomping around in the corridor outside and shouting orders to each other and bursting through the next rooms, and I know they're coming. And I hear them when I'm the outside of the door, sitting there with your rifle, you're ready to open up on them, and then they kick the door open and start shouting, and you don't react as quickly as you think you will.
Mm.
So nowadays, apparently, they're taking a little bit more time, so they don't accidentally get civilians. They also get less friendly casualties of their own, because they take a bit more time, so they observe more, and they're less likely to get ambushed by someone, and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think where modern combat games tend to fall down is not accounting for that sort of thing, and it's really tricky. It's really tricky to emulate in a game, because you've got your figurines and all the rest, so you know where all the people are.
Mm-hmm.
This is the nature of a player. And even if you don't have figurines, the first thing players are going to do is get a piece of paper and start writing down where everyone is and doing the layout. I don't mind that they do that, because having that overview is kind of a simulation of the experience of being a third level fighter or whatever. It's a simulation of that you're going to have that overview. So I don't mind that. But the real thing about combat is that it's very hard to not be just focused just on what's directly in front of you, and you have that deafness and the tunnel vision, and not feeling pain, guys being stabbed or shot and not realize it till afterwards and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's really hard to emulate, that kind of fog of war thing. And you have to be pretty aggressive with morale checks as well, because most people, it's not like Command and Conquer. You don't have to chase around that last little one infantryman in the corner of the map.
Right.
They take a certain amount of casualties, or even without taking casualties, they'll just withdraw. People will come under heavy fire, and they'll go, yep, screw this, I'm getting out of here, and they'll pull back. We'll come back later with an attack helicopter or whatever.
Right. Right.
So that's where I feel most games fall down. They confuse precision with accuracy, going into all these little details, like GURPS with 1 second combat rounds. So a boxing round, professional boxing round, would be 180 GURPS combat rounds. Oof. Don't do a 12-round fight,
Yeah.
So they go for the precision without, and as a result, they don't get the accuracy because they're so focused on that precision. The accuracy, funnily enough, is a bit foggier. It might sound a bit self-contradictory, but it possibly makes sense in context.
One of the first games I ran into that tried, that made a level attempt at doing gun porn was actually Cyberpunk. The original box set, it was like a D&D basic box set, and they had this system called Friday Night Firefight was their game of choice. And I remember reading the combat supplement that came in the set. They had the combat rules in their own separate booklet, and I'm not bashing Mike Pondsmith or any of the people who worked on it, but one of the things they launch into immediately is, we talked to police officers and ex-military and doctors who worked trauma, and they just cataloged how realistic they had striven to make Friday Night Firefight. Now, the last time I looked at the first edition of Cyberpunk 2020 was almost 30 years ago, so I don't remember what exactly hitches it had, but 19-year-old me thought, well, damn, that's pretty authoritative. This thing must, this must be like, next best thing to being there, but with dice and pencils instead of, pistols and magazines. But I remember little quirks like just because of the weaponry of the game, Cyberpunk, the earlier rules, a guy getting shot literally all over because it used hit locations, because that was a big late 80s, early 90s thing, was hit locations. Someone literally getting shot all over, but they were wearing what they call turtle armor in the rules. And not one shot penetrated, so it didn't count. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have, and I'm certainly not trying to pry too much, but if you were wearing a SAPI plate and somebody plugged you in it, you're not going to go, ha ha, that didn't get through. That didn't get through my defenses. It's my turn now.
I haven't been shot, so I can't say, but what I am told is, no, you still don't like being shot.
No.
It doesn't matter how much armor you have, you're still not happy about the experience.
In the words of Nicholas Moran, a YouTuber who talks about his days of fighting in a tank and so on, it is a significant emotional event.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of it this way, how many of us would, being told this particular armor we're about to give you will stop this kind of round. Okay, now put it on, go and stand over there while we shoot at you. How many of us would be keen to do that?
Yeah, none of us. Exactly 0.0.
Well, there's a few 19-year-old blokes who go, oh, yeah, okay. But
oh, yeah.
there's the occasional crazy bastard. But, yeah.
And most of them live in Florida and Louisiana. And I guess a few of them in...
Queensland.
Queensland, thank you. I knew there was a place...
People get taken by crocs and stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I what I think is missing from the games is less, exactly how does the armor work and blah, 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 and more that kind of fog of war stuff. And also an emphasis on how much difference training makes. We tend to think of if somebody's got handguns 68% versus handguns 32% or whatever in some game system, we tend to think of it as just their accuracy. How good are they at firing on the range?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also firing while under adrenaline and while the target is moving and so on. There was that famous NYPD study of shootouts. Other studies got slightly different numbers, but it's broadly the same. Suspects hit with 1 in 12 shots, and police hit with 1 in 6 shots. and this was with them shooting at people within 10 yards. And you know, if you take them down at the range, nobody's going to miss a man-sized target at 10 yards, unless they're like an 8-year-old kid who just can't even hold the damn thing up.
Yeah.
You know, so but it's a lot more difficult to fire while you yourself are being fired upon, and where you don't have perfect visibility, and as I said, the adrenaline's running, and you're going deaf, and all the rest. That's a lot bigger thing. So I think an intelligent system will consider how well do you deal with the fog of combat. That's part of the skill of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's weapon specific, because you don't get like a guy who was a boxer and then comes to the army and like he's this great gunfighter. You know, you take those guys who do the trick shoots with the gunfighting, or the trick shots. You know, they throw a coin in the air and shoot at it or whatever. Okay, stick that guy in the boxing ring and see how he goes. You know, it's a very different situation.
Yes.
So, to my mind, the training people get, it's not just in shooting accurately. That's kind of the least of it, because especially with scopes and that, that's the least of it. The real training is, handling it like in a confined area, and working with a team. The old fire and movement, you guys call bounding Overwatch.
Mm-hmm.
One group stops and fires while the other group moves forward, then they drop and they stop and they start firing, and then another group moves forward, and so on. So they advance towards the enemy to take this position. Doing that properly, we used to see like the bounds that you'd take when you get up and run and then drop down and start firing again. When we just practiced, gun group go, rifle group go, and all the rest, the bounds were like 10 to 15 yards. Then when we used blanks, they became 5 to 10 yards. Then when we used live rounds, they became 1 to 3 yards.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're worried about running in front of this guy firing his machine gun, because you're in the bush, as I said, you're in the scrub or something, and the adrenaline's running. You don't have this perfect idea of exactly where the other guys are. You hear the gun firing off to your left or your right. You hear it firing. But is he exactly there? When I go forward, did I go a couple of yards to the left or a couple of yards to the right? Oh, there's that tree. I'll jump behind that big tree that's, I can't get my arms around, so it'll probably stop rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, but that tree was a little bit to the left. Did I go in front of the machine gun? I hope not. So all your bounds become a lot shorter. You don't go as fast. So there was a wonderful passage in a book once talking about so a company attack on a platoon position, like the textbook thing, the 3 times larger force attacking one force. It's in a hill, prepared, sandbags, trenches, and all the rest. And the British Army, when they drilled that back home, it took like 20 minutes, and they went through about 60 rounds each. Mm. And then when they actually did it in the Falklands War, it took 2.5 hours.
Yeah. And
the guys went through about 300 rounds each. And remarkably, those 30 Argentines up in that position, not all 30 died. Maybe 5 or 6 died, and another 10 wounded, and the other half of them just gave up. So I think that's what combat games tend to miss out on. They focus on the physical mechanics, and they treat it like a first-person shooter, or one of the strategy games where you have to chase out that last little infantryman, and everyone fights to the death. And everyone always has a very clear picture of the battlefield. And the reality is a lot foggier. It's a lot foggier, and not many people are crazy enough to fight to the death.
Generally speaking,
most people recognize when it's lost, and I'll run away to fight again another day, or just give up. Yep, I've had enough. Half of my mates have been shot. Some of them might have died. I'm not sure. All right, I've done my duty by my country. Coming on.
Yes,
that's enough.
Yeah.
And so this is where the training, the cheap militias around the world will tend to just get them down the range and firing at targets. The more professional militaries will have them doing the drills. Gun group go, rifle group go. That's the most basic one, even the Army Reserve does. But the regular army and then special forces units, they do more and more of that training with live rounds and then go into rooms. Because I think what's not often appreciated is it's not just that these guys are better shots, the special versus forces versus infantry versus reserve versus militia versus civilians or something. It's not just that they're better shots and better technical skills, but they drill and they drill and they drill. They do more in a combat round. Comes back to that AD&D thing of the X level fighter gets that many attacks. They get their level in attacks against 0 level guys. They just get more done in a combat round. You know, they're just moving, even when they're taking, as I said, slowing down the drills and taking time. It's still a lot faster than the inexperienced guys will go. You know, like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You know, everyone has a plan until half a dozen SWAT guys burst in the room, or chuck a flashbang into the room and burst in, shouting.
No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Well, yeah, it's just, I can't emphasize enough how overwhelming it is, unless you're really experienced with it. You know, like I said, just sitting there with my rifle pointed at the door, waiting for these guys to burst in, and they burst in, and I do nothing because I was just a little inexperienced soldier, didn't know what the hell I was doing, and they had a drill, and I didn't. You know, and that's, I believe, what SWAT teams and so on focus on, just overwhelming force and a lot of noise and all the rest, so that people just go and they freeze up, and by the time they figured out what's happening, it's over and they've been disarmed and hogtied. So just to be overwhelming. So I think that sort of thing is what's missing from the games. People will sort of focus on 9mm versus 45 and all that sort of stuff, and right. Remember hydrostatic shock and all that.
Yeah,
they focus on all that. I don't think that's the most important thing, because most people go into combat don't get shot.
Well, what was the study? And you may have heard of this, and I think we've mentioned this before, but since there was some huge research study, probably came out of one of the think tanks like RAND or something like that. But since the advent of semi-automatic firearms on the battlefield, studies based on battle reports, based on casualty reports, based on eyewitness comments and so on, basically they took this big stew pot of info and simmered it forever, and they came to the conclusion that in a combat situation, rifle squad versus rifle squad, however you want to break it down, at point of first contact, only 11% of participants on either side, regardless of fire superiority or what have you, do what they should in a meeting engagement, where literally just two sides bump into each other. 89% of them don't do what they should be doing. They drop to the ground and don't shoot. They scramble for cover. You know, they don't. They don't immediately grab the radio.
You might be thinking of General Marshall's World War II study, that only about 10 to 15% of guys ever fired directly at the enemy.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it.
They were asking, why is it that in engagements against Germans, like given the same kind of engagements, we have more guys get killed than them? And they found that, only about 10 to 15% of guys ever fired directly at the enemy, because they didn't want to hurt anyone, basically. So guys would fire in the air, just scare him, or they'd load magazines for another guy, going, he's a better shot, so I'll just load magazines for him. Or they'd be bandaging or running messages or doing anything but fire directly at the enemy. And if an officer came along and jumped in the trench and said, "You shoot at that guy," almost everyone would do it. But then the officer gets out of the trench and goes to the next one, and then they continue firing in the air or not firing or whatever. There was even, after the Battle of Gettysburg, they picked up all the muskets afterwards and to refurbish them for reuse. And there were a number of guys who had done multiple loads. So they put the powder in, and then the bullet, and then wadding on top to hold it all in, and then go and fire. some guys had not fired. They just put in multiple loads. Because while they were there in the midst of everyone else firing, nobody will notice if I just don't fire. And there was one guy had 23 loads in there.
One of
So, and nothing else can explain how is it that guys can be 100 yards from each other, 100 guys lined up against another 100 guys, and they fire, and only one or two guys fall down each round. Because when they had them line up and fire at a target 100 yards away, like a 6 foot high and 100 yards wide, and had them fire at it, everyone hit the target. That was no problem. But when they got there, and part of it can be blamed on the gunpowder they used at the time. It had a lot of smoke. That's why people wonder why they wore those bright uniforms and that, so they could bloody be seen. So the officer knew where his men were. And, he's riding around on his horse trying to rally his men and finds that he's actually walked in between the lines.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so they were firing above the guys' heads, firing high, or just not firing at all. And so the US Army looked at this and they decided, okay, well, maybe it's the training, and maybe we don't need to get them on the range with a bullseye. We need them to have a man-shaped target that pops up, and when they fire and hit it, it falls down. It's just drill. So man-shaped target pops up, you fire, target falls down. Man-shaped target pops up, you fire, target falls down. Repeat 1,000 times. Now you go to the battlefield. Man-shaped target pops up, you fire, man-shaped target falls down. Oh, that was actually a man, not just a man-shaped target, but it was actually a man. Oh, shit. So from this, the apparent firing rate went from 10-15% in World War II to about 50% in Korea. And it is said to have been 95+% in the Vietnam War.
Interesting. Very
I'm a bit
interesting.
skeptical of that because it was based on personal interviews. I don't think it was that high. I would estimate in the Australian Army, when I was in it, the firing rate was about 25%. I would estimate. But I'm no great authority. But that was the interview. I think this might also be part of the reason for the rise in post-traumatic stress disorder as a percentage of all the injuries out there, because you can get a guy to fire at a man-shaped target, but you can't get him to feel good about it afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think previously the guys who were firing were the ones who weren't that bothered by it, but once they trained them to do it, even if they're bothered by it, afterwards they reflected on it and went, oh, actually, I don't feel good about that. So there's that. Now, we don't really want that in a role-playing game because people want to be Rambo. They don't want to be the guy cowering in the corner who,
Sure,
who doesn't fire when he could. They don't want to be that helpless guy that, the guys come into the house with crowbars and start beating up his family and he just sits there cowering with his pistol and not firing it. You don't want to play that guy.
right.
You want to play the guy who Rambo's out on them. Yeah.
Unless that guy is Bob Odenkirk and it's the upcoming movie Nobody. Then everybody at the table wants to be him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a different genre of role playing than we've been talking about, but yeah, I think once that movie rolls out, you'll probably have a lot of college game clubs with, well, my guy's just this nebbish kind of businessman, except. Because come on, didn't you, like when you were a kid and you were role playing, was it like you'd have somebody show up and say, my character has a mysterious background. It turns out his father is the leader of the evil empire. Really? Really? I didn't see that come. Did you go to cinema a couple of weeks ago by any chance and see a science fiction film?
Just noticed how dark I was.
No.
That's in all the movies too. Like everyone's, the suburban mum who's an ex-CIA ninja.
Yeah. The long kiss goodnight. God, the long movie Wasted.
Well, I mean, that's. So yeah, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
So, and this is where we get into games can simulate all sorts of things, but that doesn't mean that they should.
Yeah.
We don't want to role play post-traumatic stress disorder.
No. What is it? Unless you're a story gamer, and I don't want you at my table anyway.
Yeah.
But there's this. I've started like every eighth sentence with "there's this YouTuber," but I swear I'll stop after this. There is this YouTuber named Tom Scott who is just full of these cool little factoids, and he talked about coastline lengths. One of the most respected journals of international data in terms of geography, demographics, general statistics is actually the CIA World Factbook. Man, if you want to know it about a country, the CIA has it on the web. The CIA World Factbook one year listed the length of the coastline of, I can't remember what he was talking about, Madagascar, as this long. But Rand McNally says it's this long. But Encyclopedia Britannica says it's this long. The problem is all coastlines are fractal. If you start walking up the edge of Florida, right at the sea, and you've got a pedometer that measures how far you go, you might come to the conclusion, well, from Miami Beach to Tallahassee, I've walked 389 miles. Therefore, the coast length of Florida is 389 miles, and that is an entirely reasonable point of view to take. But wait a second. There's a couple of inlets along the way. There's a couple of seasonal washouts along that you couldn't have you would have had to have gone around. And the problem is the further down you zoom, you go from the coast of Norway, famous for its fjords, is you know, X hundred miles to no, the coast of Norway is thousands and thousands and thousands of miles because all those fjords
drill down to the details. You become more precise, but less accurate.
But less accurate, exactly, right on the nose, and we come right back around to it. More precise, less accurate, and both parties are right.
There's that in game design, and then there's just do you really want all these elements in it?
Yeah.
So, as I said, that's the thing about modern combat systems. They miss out on the fog of war, and just what a difference training and a bunch of guys working together regularly compared to just a random couple of guys. Just what a difference it makes, and how much more they accomplish in any amount of time, how much more they get done, as well as being more willing to shoot at the enemy, directly at the enemy, but just how much more that they get done. They just, because they've got their drills, this guy goes and this guy goes, they know exactly, as it's saying, if you have to look over if you feel the need to look over your shoulder to see if the other guy's doing the job he should be doing, one of you shouldn't be there. That's the way these guys work. That's the way well-trained guys work. And to my mind, that's part of your character leveling up as well. You get better at working together with the rest of the team, even if the players don't always demonstrate that.
Right.
Your character has the potential. Whether you choose to use that potential or not is, just like you could have your strength. That doesn't mean you actually use it to lift things or whatever. But it's there. Whether you're using it or not, it's there.
Right.
Superman, when he makes love to Lois, doesn't tear her to pieces, or doesn't crush her to death when he embraces her.
Yeah, there's a rather infamous essay. I think it was Norman Spinrad, and it would absolutely make sense if it was Norman Spinrad. It was a little anyway, who wrote a bit called "Man of Steel, Woman of Tissue Paper," that covers the logistical problems with that right there, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
Let's not go into that much detail.
No.
Yeah, so he has his strength. That doesn't mean he has to use it. Your character has that level. They have the capacity to work very well with the rest of the team, as in part expressed by their level. Whether or not you as a player choose to use that, or just decide to run off by yourself and do stupid shit, that's up to you. But they've got the capacity. So that's why I think the abstractions of D&D work.
And I find myself very much in agreement with you. So, for those of you who stuck with us through this nonsense, and I realize, there was an internet hiccup. I actually, when I walked my dog during that intervention and got up the end of the block, like, I was like, shit, we're not picking it back up tonight, because the guy had like a 2-foot wide, 4-foot long, like 3-foot deep trench dug out. But then I get back to the house and I see you sitting there, and Google is like, your stream is still going. So for those of you who stared at my wall and at Kyle's wall and so on, or if you just are randomly clicking through the video and like, why is this big section of nothing happening? I will be editing this video out. I will be resizing it to take out essentially the desert of us not doing anything, and then uploading it to Facebook, and you'll be able to watch it here, of course, on YouTube. But regardless of how you catch this in the future or whatever, thank you very much for watching. I'd like to thank co-host Kyle for jumping in and suggesting the YouTube live stream thing. I think when we have you on, Kyle, we're going to do this. There's ways you can split a stream and stream to 2 different services at the same time, so I could actually have this going on. I think, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And I'm sure I'll do it with the same aplomb and skill that I apply to all technical issues here on my streams, which means you may actually see me running around on fire. But yeah, no, this was a lot of fun, and I think I know you don't. I know you don't own any, but I've been struggling to remedy that. But I do want to get some Twilight 2000 in your hands, so you can sit in and give your opinions on Twilight 2000, because that's a good game. And we could go another hour with me just talking about Twilight 2000, but one thing, and we can talk about this offline, is it actually does do the combat stress thing a little bit, but we'll address that later. But thank you, Kyle, so much for being here. Now tomorrow, Tracy Lesh will be on. I will be doing that. Will be 5 o'clock tomorrow. I will have Tracy Lesh on, and yeah, hopefully nothing else will fall apart, technically speaking, while we're trying to do that. But anytime you want to hop on a stream, Kyle, anytime at all, like if just whatever reason you've had too much coffee or not enough or whatever, and are like, I want on stream, just I'll bring you on board, okay?
Radio.
All right. Thank you again, everyone. Sorry for the technical issues. This will get edited down. It went from Kyle and I BSing to David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia, the staring at the wall version this week. So we won't let that happen again. Peace, and I'll catch you guys later. Thank you, Kyle.